Good evening, everyone. I'm Paulette Ross, the chair of SuffrageForward, and I want to welcome you to part 2 of our series, The Power of Persistence. As shown in the first segment, which aired a few weeks ago, our series has been created in celebration of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. It would be impossible to give you a complete history of the women's movement in a 3-hour series. So our goal is to inform and educate about the ongoing battle women and allied men had to endure through the years to achieve equality between the sexes. It's a battle that goes on today, and we hope that we can inspire you to be a part of this ever-changing movement in the quest for equality. As in segment 1, tonight we host a variety of guests, both locally and nationally known, as well as several video vignettes and slideshows to help bring the message that achieving suffrage was not easy, and that achieving true equality continues to be elusive. We begin part 2 with Activism of Native American Women, a video by Penny Peace and narrated by Claire Sheridan.
The Activism of Native American Women. Zitkala Shah. Zitkala Shah, Sioux activist, accomplished musician, and teacher, wrote about the dichotomy between her Native American identity and the world of the white man. Her writings about Native American life appeared in popular magazines such as Atlantic Monthly and Harper's Monthly. In her 40s, Zitkala Shah moved to Washington, D.C., focused on political writing, and founded the National Council of American Indians to unite all tribes to work together to gain full citizenship. Her investigative work for the Indian Welfare Committee led to the Indian Reorganization Act, which returned management of Native American lands to the tribes. Marie Louise Bottineau Baldwin. Attorney and prominent Native American activist Marie Louise Bottineau Baldwin moved from Minnesota to Washington, D.C. in the early 1890s to defend the treaty rights of her tribe, the Turtle Mountain Chippewa Nation. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt appointed Baldwin a clerk in the Office of Indian Affairs. Active in the women's suffrage movement in Washington, D.C., she marched with other female lawyers in the 1913 suffrage parade organized by Alice Paul and was a member of the contingent that met with President Wilson in the Oval Office in 1914. Laura Cornelius Kellogg. Laura Cornelius Kellogg, known popularly as Princess Winogene, was a descendant of Oneida leaders, an author, and activist who fought for tribal lands and Native American self-government. Kellogg supported women's suffrage, emphasizing Iroquois women's equality with the men. She said, "It is a cause of astonishment to us that you white women are only now in this 20th century claiming what has been Indian women's privilege as far back as history traces." Kellogg was a controversial figure among mainstream politicians, the Indian Affairs Bureau, and some Native American tribes. She was arrested at least 4 times in her fight against white supremacist discrimination, tenement life, and child labor. She pursued land claims for Oneida tribes and the Six Nations, but many Native Americans were divided over her plans and politics. Suzette LaFlèche Tibbles, also called Inshata Teumba, or Bright Eyes, born 1854, died 1903, was a writer, lecturer, interpreter, and activist of the Omaha tribe in Nebraska. Her activism for Native American rights ultimately helped to achieve the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which granted citizenship to all Native Americans born in the United States.
Organizer, writer, and women's rights pioneer Jovita Idar was born in Laredo, Texas in 1885. In her first teaching job, Jovita found herself without books, pencils, or paper, and vowed to change that and provide free instruction for poor Mexican children. She believed, and I quote, "Educate a woman, you educate a family," unquote. She turned from teaching to journalism, working at her father's newspaper, focusing on violence against and mistreatment of Mexican Americans. You know, courage describes many of the women of that day, and Jovita displayed her courage in 1911 by standing up against the Texas Rangers. For more of Jovita's story, here is Alejandra Ruiz, theater artist and activist.
As we share and celebrate sweeping narratives of a glorious, enduring march towards women's voting rights, we must also acknowledge and understand the complex and uncomfortable reality of the women who were left out. Native American women and African American women were excluded from the 19th Amendment, as were Latin American women. In Texas, for example, Mexican American women were denied formal participation in their state suffrage movements. Despite this exclusion, Mexican American women leaders were courageous in taking public position on votes for women and other matters of politics, social reform, and injustices, issues that played out for them every single day. Throughout the progressive era, newspapers were essential conduits for bringing awareness to social issues. For Latin Americans, one such publication was La Crónica, a Spanish-language newspaper which began in Ladero, Texas in the 1890s. La Crónica was owned and managed by Nicasio Idar and his 8 children, including his daughter, Jovita Idar, who would go on to make a profound mark on her community. La Crónica ran poetry columns, promotions of civic leagues, editorials against bigotry, and editorials in favor of women's suffrage. Articles appearing in La Crónica, many written by Jovita Idar herself under a pseudonym, criticized anti-Mexican discrimination, lynchings, and poor social conditions, which were often rampant in Mexican American communities in Texas. As a former teacher, Jovita Idar was passionate about education, and she felt strongly about preserving Mexican culture. She is quoted with saying, "Mexican children in Texas need an education. There is no other means to do it but ourselves, so we are not devalued and humiliated by the strangers who surround us." Idar's activism for education would intersect with her passion for women's rights when she founded La Liga Femenil Mexicanista in 1911. The first of its kind, this group of Latin American women supported education, championed women's cultural, charitable, and political causes, including women's suffrage. The motto of La Liga: educate a woman and you educate a family. One of Idar's most notable pro-suffrage articles was published that same year, 1911, in La Crónica. Here she says, "Working women know their rights and proudly rise to face the struggle. The hour of our degradation is past. Women are no longer servants, but rather the equals to men, companions to them." Jovita Idar courageously used her First Amendment right to speak out against injustice and bigotry. She stood up against challenges, fought for the causes she believed in, and focused on empowering Mexican American and Latin American women through education as a first step towards independence, voting rights, and equality. Today, we remember Jovita Idar.
Mabel Ping Hua Lee. Born in Hong Kong in 1896, Mabel Ping Hua Lee came to New York City at the age of 9, and by the time she was 16, she was a well-known women's suffrage activist. At the May 4th, 1912 Women's Suffrage Parade in New York City, Lee rode on horseback at the head, along with suffragists Anne Rensselaer Tinker and Anna Howard Shaw. The New York Tribune reported that Mabel, the youngest parader, was dressed, quote, in a tight-fitting black broadcloth hat with the green, purple, and white cockade of the Women's Political Union, unquote. The Tribune also commented that Mabel's mother could not join her daughter at the parade because it would be physically impossible because her feet were bound. Lee attended Barnard College, where she was part of the Chinese Students Association and wrote feminist essays including The Meaning of Women's Suffrage, in which she argued that suffrage for women was essential to a successful democracy. Lee went on to receive a PhD in economics from Columbia University, the first Chinese woman to do so. In 1917, Lee spearheaded another suffrage march, leading Chinese American women in a parade down Fifth Avenue in New York City. In the 1920s and 1930s, Lee traveled to China several times and even had job offers awaiting her there. But when her father, the director of the Baptist Mission in New York City's Chinatown, died suddenly in 1924, Lee decided to take over his role as director. Although Lee's directorship of the Baptist Mission was meant to be temporary, it would become her life's work. Although women were granted the right to vote nationally in 1920, the reality was that not all women benefited from the passage of the 19th Amendment. Under the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese immigrants were not allowed to become citizens, and without citizenship, women could not vote. It wasn't until the Chinese Exclusion Act was revoked in 1943 that Lee could become a citizen and, hence, vote. The 1943 winter issue of Wonder Woman predicted a woman would be president by the 31st century. SuffrageForward predicts this will occur much earlier.
Bread and Roses, a political slogan, was inspired by a speech by factory inspector and women's suffrage activist Helen Todd. In her speech, she appealed for fair wages and dignified work conditions for women, explaining that bread for all and roses too expressed the soul of the women's movement. In 1910, she said, and I quote, "Bread which is home, shelter, and security, the roses of life, music, education, nature, and books shall be the heritage of every child that is born in the country in the government of which she has a voice." Now, James Oppenheim, poet, novelist, editor, and founder of the magazine The Seven Arts, often depicted labor troubles and was quite inspired by Todd's speech. So he wrote and published his poem, Bread and Roses. Here, performing the poem, is Tom Stratford, actor and president of Stratford Hudson Productions.
As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, 1,000,000 darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray are touched with the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle too for men, for their women's children, and we mother them again. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, unnumbered women dead go crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits new. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we bring the greater days. The rising of the women means the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories. Bread and roses, bread and roses.
In 1849, Emma Lazarus was born into a wealthy Jewish family in New York City. Her ancestry, both from Germany and Brazil via Portugal escaping the Inquisition, dates back before the American Revolution. Her first poems and sonnets were published when she was 14 to 17 years of age, and later she developed an interest in her heritage as well as the plight of immigrants. In 1883, Emma wrote a poem as a donation to an auction to raise money for the construction of a pedestal for the Statue of Liberty. After the money was raised, the poem was forgotten. Sadly, Emma died in 1887 at 38 years old. But in 1903, after a 2-year campaign by a friend, Georgina Schuyler, the poem was cast into a bronze plaque to memorialize Lazarus. The plaque was and is mounted inside the pedestal in the lower level of the base. Now, with more than 200 industry awards, including the National Edward R. Murrow Award, 25 Emmy wins, and one of the most award-winning reporters in New York State, reading The New Colossus is top investigative reporter from News 12, Tara Rosenblum.
Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed Sunset Gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door.
Welcome back, and thank you, Tara. Now let me tell you a little bit about Suffrage Forward. At the beginning of last year, famed artist Cristina Biaggi and I got together with legislator Harriet Cornell and community activist and filmmaker Joe Allen to discuss the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. At that meeting, we created Suffrage Forward, not only to celebrate women's right to vote, but to empower women now and in the future and create awareness among all people of the strength and resiliency of girls and women. Lilian Morvay and Robin Rosenberg soon joined us, and our official steering committee was now launched. Suffrage Forward is a nonprofit fund, and we would love to have your support so we may continue sharing amazing programs and events with you. With a $100 donation, we will send you our exclusive commemorative tote bag as a gift for your support. Created by Cristina Biaggi, this beautiful canvas tote highlights historical events and prominent women in the fight for women's voting rights, culminating with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. The tote, designed by us in collaboration with Archery New York City, a women's owned business, is made entirely in the United States. Each side of the bag features one of Biaggi's iconic collage reliefs that depict notable suffragettes such as Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and many more. The art is meant to create a feeling of movement to seem as if the women are converging on you, the viewer and carrier of the bag. For more information about the tote bags, the artist, and our organization, please visit our website, SuffrageForward.org. And now, In the Driver's Seat by Penny Peace. Born in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, to a prominent Quaker family, Alice Paul became one of the most notable leaders in the suffrage movement. While studying in England, Alice became involved with the women fighting for their right to vote, and upon returning to the United States in 1910, she, along with Lucy Burns, formed the National Women's Party, and in 1917, to pressure President Wilson to support the amendment granting voting rights to women, more than 1,000 women picketed in front of the White House. Many were arrested, including Alice. The harsh treatment of these women ironically helped change public sentiment in favor of the women's suffrage. After 2+ years of terrible treatment, public outrage, and arrests, the 19th Amendment was ratified. Alice then turned her attention to the passage of an Equal Rights Amendment for women, and she proposed this in 1923. Sadly, nearly 100 years later, it has still not become a law. Reading the poem, I Am Alice Paul, a poem from Shout, Poetry for Suffrage by Susanna Rich, is theater artist, activist, and Evie Award nominee from Emerson College, Maggie Sheridan.
I am Alice Paul. I am a suffragist, fighting to be heard, for all women to be heard. The time has come for a new direction. So I throw stones into the windows of power. I have broken 48. I have broken thousands. For this, I am locked up in an airless prison, rank with the stench of sweat, vomit, urine, feces, women's blood. They will say it's a book of poetry, but it's a bowl I pitch at a high window, hit my mark that we might breathe the democratic air. My sister's suffs cheer my aim. My window then is blocked up, a solid board that covers the kindly face of an old man who bemoans his hammer and nails. But there is another air, another light, another song. So I toss stones. I break windows open when doors will not. I break glass, that suspense of liquid sand. I throw glass, electric bulbs and goblets. I throw books. I throw the book at those who make unjust laws. I break laws that choose me, though I have not chosen them. I break whatever needs shattering to make the world as beautiful as I can. I throw and throw until I may throw my hat into the ring. Cast and cast until it is ballots that we all cast. There will never be a new world order until women are a part of it. The movement is a sort of mosaic. Each of us puts in one little stone, and then you have a great mosaic, like the sweeping floors of New York's new 1905 Penn Station, forming a foundation for the struts and girders and beams lofting a vast glass ceiling above us. There will come a time when they will say of a woman who will carry a nation, she went where most women could not have gone, that she was a child of the light. She broke the glass ceiling. Let her shards gleam among our stones.
More than gender. Until recently, African American women's struggle for the ballot has been ignored and downplayed in historical analyses. They believed their battle for enfranchisement would help improve their families and communities. It included hard work, determination, and perseverance, often in the face of white supremacist ideology. Unlike the white women's suffrage movement, the black women's movement had integrity and justice in a firm stand for a universal suffrage and nothing less. While establishing a new field of study, African American women's history, Dr. Rosalind Terborg Penn was one of a very few scholars who shed light on the long suppressed role of black women in the women's suffrage movement. Her books examined and challenged the existing narrative that was dominated by white activists like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Black women, she said, were shunted aside in the history books because their goals had diverged from those of the white, mostly upper-middle-class women who had led the charge. White women wanted parity with white men, while black women, only just emerging from slavery, wanted to use the ballot box to fight the racial oppression prevalent in the South. It is thanks to her work that we know about so many of the African American women who fought for women's suffrage. Adela Hunt Logan was similar to African American suffragists of the past, such as Mary Ann Shadd Cary, Frances E.W. Harper, and Sojourner Truth, in that she contributed to the Black women's suffrage movement's philosophy, combining traditional women's suffrage rationale with dimensions of race. Logan said, "The colored American believes in equal justice to all, regardless of race, color, creed, or sex, and longs for the day when the United States shall indeed have a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, even including colored people." Journalist, newspaper editor, suffragist, and civil rights leader Ida B. Wells devoted nearly 50 years of her life fighting for the causes she supported. In her role as a journalist, Wells investigated lynchings, school segregation, and racial injustice. She also founded several organizations, including the Alpha Suffrage Club, the first suffrage organization for African American women, and the National Association of Colored Women. She was also a co-founder of the NAACP. At the now famous 1913 suffrage parade, Wells strongly objected to the suggestion that the parade be segregated to appease the white suffragists. In that same year, Wells and her Alpha Suffrage Club successfully mobilized Chicago's African American women. This effort resulted in the election of the first African American alderman, and later in 1916, it led to the ability for Black women in Illinois to vote in the presidential election. Their organization illustrated what Black women could do at the polls if given the opportunity. Expediency, self-interest, and in some cases, white supremacist ideology of the white women's suffrage movement resulted in the exclusion of Black suffragists. While throughout the decades-long fight for enfranchisement of women, the efforts by Black suffragists were for all women.
Despite the successes of women's suffrage movement, obstacles remained even after 1920 for voters of color. In the mid-20th century, John Lewis fought for voting rights for African Americans and became one of the great rights for all fighters. Reading an excerpt from a speech written by John Lewis is Wileen Wood, retired educator and activist.
These remarks were made by the Honorable John Lewis, United States Congressman from Georgia. The vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool or instrument we have in a democratic society. If we fail to use it, we can lose it. A few short years ago, here in America, after the Civil War, after the freeing of the slaves, we had the vote for a short while. But the vote was taken away from us. People fought, people died, people gave their very lives, their blood, for the right to vote. At one point in our history, people of color, African Americans in particular, had to pass a so-called literacy test. Men and women were asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, the number of jelly beans in a jar. There were Black lawyers, Black doctors, teachers, housewives, farmers, college professors, high school principals who were told over and over and over again that they could not pass the literacy test. People had to pay a poll tax. At one point in our history, women could not vote. If you did not own property, you could not vote. So it has been a long, ongoing struggle. It has been a struggle where people I knew, friends of mine, colleagues of mine, were beaten, some shot and killed. We made a decision some few short years ago after I spoke at the March on Washington on August 28th in 1963. I was 23 years old. I had all of my hair then. I was a few pounds lighter. I was the youngest speaker. 10 of us spoke. But when I was working on my speech, I was reading a copy of the New York Times. I saw a picture of a group of Black women in Southern Africa carrying signs saying, "One man, one vote." And I said something like, "That African cry is our cry. It must be ours." And the young people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, working with groups like the NAACP, CORE, SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's organization, the Urban League, the Voter Education Project of the Southern Regional Council, and so many other groups worked day in and day out trying to get people registered to vote. We didn't have the Voting Rights Act then. People stood in an immovable line. People continued to be arrested and continued to be jailed. But they didn't give up. They didn't give in. We never became bitter or hostile. We kept the faith. We kept our eyes on the prize.
All I ask for myself, I claim for my wife and sister. Let our action be based upon the rock of everlasting principle. No class of citizens in this country can be deprived of the ballot without injuring every other class. Charles Lennox Remond, abolitionist, suffragist, and brother of Sarah Remond, May 10, 1867. The Green Berets, one of the last forces of the Army to remain all-male, announced in July 2020 that a woman soldier was joining the elite unit. The Army does not name Green Beret members to protect their identities for future missions. Suffrage Forward congratulates Lieutenant Junior Grade Madeline Swagel, who on July 10, 2020, became the U.S. Navy's first African-American fighter pilot. We second U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Paula Dunn's comment, "Go forth and kick butt."
Sarah Breedlove, better known as Madam C.J. Walker, rose from poverty in the South to making it into the Guinness Book of World Records as the first female self-made millionaire in America. She made her fortune by manufacturing scalp, hair, and facial products for Black women. Reading the story of Madam Walker, written by legislator Harriet Cornell, is one of Rockland's legendary women, Dr. Frances Pratt. Dr. Pratt is the longtime chairwoman of the Nyack branch of the NAACP. Now, Frances had a long career as a nurse, dressed in a white uniform and a cap. But she loved to dress up, and her trademark, a spectacular hat, or I should say hundreds of one-of-a-kind hats, many of which her husband Marshall bought or designed for her. Wearing one now is Dr. Pratt, as she tells you the story of how Madam Walker went from rags to riches and just what she did with her money.
Madam Walker was born in Louisiana in 1867 and named Sarah Breedlove. She was born free after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, but her older siblings were plantation slaves. She was orphanaged at the age of 7. At 10, moved to Mississippi to live with her sister and brother-in-law. At the age of 14, To escape abuse from her brother-in-law, Sarah married Moses McWilliam. They had one daughter, Aaliyah. Moses died soon after, and Sarah and her child moved to St. Louis, where her brother lived, earning $1 a day as a laundress. She learned about hair care from her brothers, who were barbers, and with her new knowledge began developing her own product line. When she was 37, Sarah and Aaliyah moved to Denver, where she met and married Charles Joseph Walker. She sold her products door to door, marking herself as Madam C.J. Walker. She showed Black women how to budget and build their own businesses, encouraged them to become financially independent, gave prizes to those who sold the most, and rewarded those who made large contributions to charities in their communities. When she moved to New York City, she joined the executive committee of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, known as the NAACP, which organized the silent protests. Paraded on Fifth Avenue, it drew more than 8,000 African Americans to protest in riots in St. Louis that killed 39 African Americans. Sarah commissioned Verner Tandy, the first licensed Black architect in New York City, to design a house for her in Irvington on Hudson, which would be a gathering place to inspire African Americans to pursue their dreams. Sadly, she died the following year at the age of 52. Before her death, Sarah gave the NAACP the largest gift it had ever received from an individual for its anti-lynching fund. Sarah breathed love, grew up in poverty, experienced abuse and hard times. Here are the words she spoke at a convention. I am a woman who came from the cotton fields of the South. From there, I was promoted to the wash tub, then promoted to the cook kitchen, and from there, I promoted myself into the business of manufacturing hair goods. I have built my own factory on my own ground.
Coming to us by way of Arts Rock and its Songs of Protest concert are the Chapin sisters with Tom Chapin and Michael Mark. Making music that the New York Times praises as tantalizingly close to beauty, the Chapin sisters carry on from a proud musical legacy. Grammy Award-winning singer, songwriter, and father Tom Chapin, and legendary uncle Harry Chapin. In 2005, the sisters garnered critical acclaim by forging a distinctive musical imprint. Music has played an important part in every social reform movement in American history, and we are pleased to present this concert footage of We Will Not Stop Singing. Listen to the words and do sing along.
Stop guys got it.
Amazing, Michael.
But we will not stop chanting. We will not stop chanting. We will not stop chanting. Chanting till the dawn, till the world can sing along. Till the world can sing, till the world can sing, till the world can sing along. Till the
Thank you to the Chapin family for that amazing song and the inspiration to continue fighting for equality. A special thanks to Tara Rosenblum of News 12 for her rendition of The New Colossus. And of course, thank you to all the performers who participated tonight. I must take a moment to especially thank Suffrage Forward team for their hard work in bringing this program to you. You know, celebrating a hard-fought victory, such as the adoption of the 19th Amendment, seems easy now. But in 36 state houses across the country, almost as many elected officials opposed giving women the right to vote as there were advocates for it. And public sentiment was certainly divided. Despite this fact, the suffragettes were undaunted. They fought with perseverance, grit, skill, sacrifice, courage, and conviction. I hope our program serves as a reminder of this, and most importantly, helps us all cherish our right to vote. On behalf of all of us at Suffrage Forward, let me say thank you for watching, and we'll see you August 25th at 7 p.m. for the conclusion of The Power of Persistence.